You know, Rome wasn't always ruled by powerful emperors. For centuries, it was a republic, and it was fiercely proud of its laws and its citizen army.
But that republic started to crack, and the story of how it broke really involves two brothers and a huge fight over, well, over dirt, over land.
Right. And it's so important to understand that the problems weren't about foreign enemies. They were internal. It was this massive crisis of wealth inequality, all rooted in who owned the land.
Exactly. So today we're going to dive into the lives of the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, and see how their attempt to solve this one problem, land ownership, led straight to political violence that basically doomed the Roman Republic.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. We have to talk about Rome's constant wars.
Always fighting, all the time. Those long campaigns are the essential background for this whole mess.
Think about the small Roman farmer. I mean, these guys were the backbone of the army. They had to serve for years, sometimes decades, far from home.
And while they were away fighting, their small family farms just, they suffered terribly. They couldn't be maintained, and the family left behind often couldn't pay the taxes or their debts.
Meanwhile, the super rich in Rome, who were getting even richer from all this conquest, they saw an opportunity.
A huge one. They started buying up all this property, sometimes just seizing it from families who couldn't keep up. And this is how they created the latifundia.
Latifundia, that's a key term here. Can you break that down?
Yeah, think of it as a massive industrial-scale farm, an enormous estate owned by one super-rich family from the senatorial class.
And here's the real economic tragedy for this soldier coming home. These giant farms didn't hire free Roman citizens to work the fields.
Why would they?
Right, why would they?
Because they used enslaved people. The wars created hundreds of thousands of captives who were sold for cheap. A small farmer just couldn't compete with the efficiency and the low cost of an estate run by mass enslaved labor.
So a returning soldier, his farm is gone, and there's no job waiting for him.
Nothing. So what happens? Thousands of these displaced families pour into the city of Rome, all of them desperate for work, for food.
And that's the picture of social collapse right there. You have this tiny group of ultra-wealthy elites and then huge crowds of desperately poor, jobless citizens.
It's a powder keg. The wealth gap just got wider and wider every single year.
Wait, but if the wealthy were driving out the very citizens who made up the army, wasn't anyone in the Senate worried? I mean, about national security.
That's the question, and that is exactly what Tiberius Gracchus realizes in 133 BC. He was a nobleman, but he saw this wasn't just a humanitarian crisis, it was a military one.
If you run out of farmers.
You run out of soldiers. Simple as that. The Republic needed property-owning citizens to fill the legions.
So he gets himself elected as a tribune of the plebs.
Right, and this was a really unique position. A tribune was elected specifically to protect the average citizen from the power of the wealthy. They were considered sacrosanct. You literally could not harm them.
And Tiberius makes this really simple argument. If the state asks a man to fight and risk his life for Rome, the state owes him a stable life for his family. He owes him his land.
So he proposes this huge land reform law, and it targets something called aer publicus.
Which literally means public land.
Exactly. It was territory that Rome had conquered, land that technically belonged to the government. But for generations, rich families, especially senators, had just been squatting on it, treating it like it was their own private property.
So Tiberius proposes a hard limit. What was it?
He wanted to enforce an old law that nobody had paid attention to for years. It said no single person could hold more than 500 jugera.
Which is about, what, 310 acres?
Yeah, around there. Any land over that limit would be taken back by the state, divided into small plots, and given to poor, landless citizens.
And here's the crucial detail, the part that shows he was thinking long-term. The new owners were not allowed to sell the land. Ever.
It was meant to create generational stability, to rebuild that farmer-soldier class from the ground up.
Sounds like a brilliant plan. The Senate must have hated it.
Hated it is an understatement. Most senators were massive landowners themselves. They saw this as straight-up confiscation of their property, an attack on their power.
And their argument was that they'd invested money in this land, right? Building villas, draining swamps.
Exactly. They claimed Tiberius was just stealing the fruits of their investment. So, since they couldn't just vote the law down, they got clever.
They found another tribune, a guy named Octavius, and convinced him to use his veto power to block the whole thing.
Which created a total political gridlock. But Tiberius's response was, well, it was revolutionary.
Yeah.
Instead of backing down, he went directly to the people.
Right, to the popular assembly.
And he asked them to vote Octavius out of office arguing that he was betraying the very people he was elected to protect.
And that removing an elected official just for disagreeing with you, that was seen as a huge violation of tradition, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a constitutional crisis, a total shock to the system. The Senate saw Tiberius as someone who was just tearing down the rules piece by piece. They thought it was setting a dangerous precedent.
And the tension finally exploded when Tiberius did something else controversial. He decided to run for tribune again for a second year in a row.
Which tradition usually forbade. His enemies immediately jumped on this, claiming he wanted to be a king, that he was trying to set up permanent power for himself.
So on election day, things turn violent.
They erupt. Senators and their followers, they grab wooden clubs, pieces of furniture, whatever they can find, and they just attack Tiberius and his supporters on Capitoline Hill.
Tiberius and about 300 of his followers were beaten to death, their bodies thrown in the river.
And this is so crucial because for hundreds of years, political fights in Rome were settled with debates and laws. This was the first time in centuries that political blood was spilled in the streets.
The precedent was now set. If you can't beat your opponent with laws,
You just murder them. It changed Roman politics forever.
But even after his murder, his land commission actually kept working for a few years, right?
It did. It settled thousands of families. But the wealthy elites were just playing the long game. They systematically cut the commission's funding and power until it just faded away.
So the core problem wasn't solved, and that set the stage for his younger brother.
10 years later, Gaius Gracchus steps up. And he was, by all accounts, an even more brilliant speaker and way more ambitious than Tiberius.
He didn't just want land reform. He wanted to change the entire system by building a broad group of allies, a coalition.
The man was a political genius. He knew he couldn't take on the Senate alone, so he built an alliance between the landless poor, the urban poor in the city, and the wealthy businessmen, the equestrian class.
Okay, so let's break down his reforms. First, for the urban poor in Rome.
He brings in the grain law. This forced the government to sell grain at a stable, heavily subsidized low price. It was a massive safety net that basically guaranteed no one in the city would starve.
That would have made him incredibly popular.
Instantly. Then he restarted the land distribution, but also launched huge public works projects, new roads, granaries.
Which created thousands of jobs for people right there in the city.
A stroke of genius. And then his final move was aimed at those wealthy businessmen. He changed the court system.
How so?
He took control of certain juries away from the senators and gave it to the equestrians. For businessmen, this was huge. They now controlled the courts that handled big financial disputes.
So Gaius was attacking the Senate from every angle: land, food, jobs, the courts. You can imagine how threatened they felt.
He'd made himself almost untouchable, but then he made one proposal that alienated his own base. He wanted to grant Roman citizenship to all of the Italian allies.
And these were the people who paid Roman taxes and fought in the Roman army but couldn't vote.
Correct. But even the common citizens in Rome, the very people getting his cheap grain, they hated this idea.
Why? Why would they turn on him over that?
Because they didn't want to share their privileges. Being a Roman citizen meant something. It meant cheap grain, legal protections, the right to vote. They didn't want to share that with millions of outsiders.
So the Senate used that issue to turn the people against him.
Brilliantly. And when Gaius ran for a third term, the Senate saw their opening. They declared what was called a senatus consultum ultimum.
Which is basically a declaration of martial law.
Exactly. It gave the consuls power to do anything necessary to protect the republic, which really meant they could kill Gaius and his supporters without a trial.
And the final fight was immediate. Gaius and his followers occupied the Aventine Hill.
But the Senate's army attacked. It was a massacre. Gaius knew he couldn't win, so he ordered his personal slaves to kill him.
His head was cut off, and the Senate then hunted down and executed thousands of his supporters.
And right after they won, they immediately passed laws to undo the reforms. They allowed the poor farmers to sell their new land.
And of course, the wealthy landowners just swooped in and bought it all back up.
So the latifundia grew even bigger, and the land crisis just got worse. The economic problem was never solved.
But the political impact was permanent. The Gracchi essentially created two lasting political factions in Rome.
On one side, you had the populares. These were the politicians who followed the Gracchi's example, using the power of the people's assemblies to push for change.
And on the other, the optimates, the traditional, wealthy upper class represented by the Senate, who fought to keep power in their own hands.
And from this point on, politics wasn't about debate anymore. It became a violent struggle between these two groups. The rules were gone. Violence was now just a political tool.
And that leads directly to the army. When soldiers saw that the state couldn't guarantee them land or a future, they stopped being loyal to the state.
Exactly. Their loyalty shifted from the Republic to individual powerful generals who promised to take care of them. Generals like Marius, Sulla, and eventually Caesar.
So this whole breakdown of law and tradition, which led to the end of the Republic, it all started with this unresolved crisis that the Gracchi brothers tried and failed to fix.
Their story really shows that when a society can't solve its biggest economic problems peacefully, the result is instability and violence.
So here's a final thought to consider. If land reform failed twice, what other changes do you think Rome needed to make to keep its republic from collapsing and to avoid a strong man taking over completely?
Good luck with your studies.